a nonprofit. We're focused on education, and we strive to be the most knowledgeable, independent source of what high-speed rail is, why we should build it, and what steps our local leaders and our federal leaders can take to make it happen. And we start off with this picture of the Acela train, which is currently the Western Hemisphere's fastest train. It links Washington with New York and Boston. It's got a lot of 90 and 110 mile an hour running. There's a short section of 150 in Connecticut, and soon in New Jersey, there will be some 160. But what it shows is if you run the trains frequently enough with the right type of service, people will ride the train in large numbers. And in my view, the biggest failing for this is actually that there aren't enough seats. And it would be better if Amtrak provided a lot more seats and charged lower tickets. But the fact that they are able to charge high fares really demonstrate that the trains are a very valuable product for Americans. We do this for a number of reasons. In essence, it all boils down to building much stronger communities. Things happen a lot better when you're face-to-face. You can do a lot over Zoom, as we're showing today, but there's those times you really need to travel, and we're very spread out across the land, and trains make it easier to travel and talk to each other there in person more often. And in the process, even though we'll increase travel, we'll actually dramatically reduce the carbon emissions generated by that, and will reduce government spending on infrastructure and other issues like cutting grass and health issues, etc. We have an asset in our region that I want to emphasize, which is O'Hare. And it plays a critical role in connecting the Midwest, and in fact the country, to Asia. And it is really a unique airport for North America. And it works because it's a hub network, it's a hub airport where a lot of people are gathered here to get on the big planes that go overseas. And one of the things we need to do to protect this and grow it is actually to get people from the Midwest to it much more easily. And trains can play a big role in making that happen. I want to point out, we don't see high-speed rail as a separate new technology. Trains are incredibly high-tech, especially overseas. Our trains are a couple of decades behind what exists in Asia and Europe. But really, it's a progression of what we've been doing for 200 years now, almost. And so it's both very high-tech and proven at the same time. But the advantage to that is the fact that it's easier to phase, it's easier to build, but we see it as instead of something separate, but a series of building blocks that you build upon each thing in order, depending upon what existing assets you have, what your markets are, you can do different things in different places. But the key things are, if you want to go faster than 90, you really need to separate the freight and fast passenger trains. If you want to go faster than 110, you need to make it separate the roads so people don't drive in front of the trains. If you want to go faster than 125, you need to take the power generation and move it off the train onto the ground through electric wires. And then because of the issue with grade crossings, probably to go faster than 110, you need to do a separate right-of-way. But the faster you go, the more true that is. And this is a train running between Milan and Bologna, where they've been going 205 miles an hour for about a decade now. And you can see they built the new tracks alongside the autostrada, or as we would call it, interstate highway. To kind of simplify this down, we've created 3 types of track. Shared use lines are owned primarily by freight railroads, and have a mix of freight and passenger on them. There's lots of those around the country, good examples of how that can work. Regional lines are where it's in public ownership and focused on passenger trains. In this region, we've got a couple of those that are metro lines, and then the line out the South Bend, South Shore line out to South Bend, and then the Amtrak, a portion of the Amtrak line to Dearborn. And then high-speed lines where you're building completely new. And in order to understand where to put each of these and how to make them work together, you really need a master plan. Because if you look, say, example, at just Rockford to Chicago, there's one amount of traffic there. But if you add Galena and Dubuque to it, then there's more traffic on the Rockford to Chicago piece. And then if you add the fact that people can take the train down to downtown Chicago and connect to a train to Milwaukee or Detroit, now there's even more opportunity to use the Chicago to Rockford train, right? So you really have to think in terms of the big picture, not segment by segment. And then we need to buy different kinds of trains than what are operating today. These pieces can put together in very different ways, depending upon, again, what your local needs are and local assets are, with adding into it bus service to fill in the gaps. In some cases, maybe a high-speed train uses shared use track and regional track and high-speed track in one journey, going slow on the freight tracks, 80 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour on the high-speed tracks, and then slowing down to come into the cities. Maybe people are changing between trains. Again, it depends upon what's happening in the local area. So this is what we envision for a potential plan for Illinois. And what you've got here is the Metro service that gets out to Elgin, Amtrak service coming down to Quincy, down to St. Louis and Carbondale. And then our desire to see really frequent service in all of these areas that are blue, preferably getting into 5 trains a day at least, maybe more than that. And then we've focused on Illinois, but you can see we think this should go at least to Waterloo, and then it goes up to into Wisconsin, etc. So this would all be shared use, lots of service and green bus lines. So in our scenario, maybe you would catch a train in Dubuque, take it to Rockford and catch a bus down to LaSalle or Bloomington, or go to Springfield. And then in the outer years, building high-speed rail that would do the Chicago to St. Louis piece in less than 2 hours. And that would really be a boost to the whole system. So that's what we would like to have happen. The legislature, just in the last couple of weeks, passed a bill that would create a commission that would create a committee around the state to help IDOT design what this network should look like. And we're hoping that it gets to the governor, then the governor signs that bill very soon. We've had some progress. If you come back here, we in the state, in cooperation with the feds, have completely rebuilt the railroad from Joliet to East St. Louis to run faster Amtrak service. So today it's going 80 miles an hour. Hopefully this summer it'll be notched up to 90. And then once it's at 90, there's actually now starting to really think about how to upgrade the signaling system. And there's technical reasons which we can explain why it's happening in these phases, but getting to 110 shortly. So that's one huge improvement. The next huge improvement is we'll see new Amtrak trains on the Amtrak routes. This is one of those new coaches that was delivered in last fall. They've been out testing them, and hopefully they'll be out running this summer, and you can buy a ticket to go to St. Louis or Carbondale or Quincy or Detroit on one of these. They're based on trains built for Brightline, and Brightline is doing a shared use line along the coast of Florida with the Florida East Coast Railroad. And then from Cocoa Across to Orlando, they're building a new line, and then they'll build a new line from there to Tampa. It's under construction to Orlando, and they're negotiating the right-of-way from Orlando to Tampa and Disney. This is the new economy section for those trains. It's what they'll look like for Amtrak service. You can see big wide windows, lots of plugs, a table if you want. You don't have to have a table, but you can. Plugs in between the seats. This is the business class. And again, this is what our Amtrak trains will look like, only with blue seats instead of white. And I want to point out the wide aisles here. So these trains are actually designed so that you can roll onto the platform unassisted, from the platform onto the train, and one from one end of the train to the other in a wheelchair unassisted. Our trains in the Midwest won't have that level of accessibility. We think we should get there, but they will be much more accessible than buses or airplanes can ever be. This is a comparison of Chicago to St. Louis. With COVID, there were 3 trains a day at 5.5 hours. Madrid to Seville is about the same distance. They've had high-speed trains there since 1993. They, during COVID, had 10 trains a day. Trains are a little bit slower than they were before at 2.5 hours. A little bit more than the cost of gas to take that train, but substantially less than flying is in the United States, with much more frequent service. And plus, the train makes stops in between where the airplane doesn't. And it's still substantially better than driving, with a huge, huge reduction in carbon emissions. And this is based on a nonprofit created a database of city pairs so that you can do a data comparison for your trip before you buy your ticket. High-speed track is a lot less expensive to build and gives you a lot more capacity. So the busiest high-speed line in the world is Tokyo to Osaka. Pre-COVID, they were carrying the equivalent of 12 highway lanes per track. That's 10 is kind of the average. And it's a lot less expensive to build. So the state of Washington is considering adding a lane to I-5 between Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. They think that's going to cost about $110 billion. The same route for a high-speed line, they've decided would be less than half of that at $42 billion. The high-speed train will cut the trip times in half. The highway will save for 5 minutes or so by adding that lane. How we do this, we can learn from California, both good and bad. There are mistakes they've made that we can learn from and not repeat. And there's a lot of good work they've done. The first thing they did was in 1990, the voters approved a big package to expand Amtrak, commuter rail, and transit throughout the state. Huge and important foundation to build on for the future. This is a train between Oceanside and LA that my son and I took probably about 5 years ago. The next big step was in 2008, the voters approved the construction of a high-speed line between San Francisco and LA. And this is under construction outside of Fresno. And then the most important thing is that they're the first to have done that integrated plan. So what they did was they went out to 2040 and they actually put together a timetable, and these colors here represent different types of service. So the red are high-speed trains, not necessarily on high-speed lines, but high-speed trains. And then these green and blue are different levels of train service. And then these yellow are connecting buses where the schedules are completely timed and one ticket to ride it. So they went out to 2040 and said, this is what we want then. What do we need to do in order to make that work today, right? And this is an incredible level of planning. Nobody's done this in the United States except for California. Around the world, only Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands have done this. This is a huge step. And what we would like the state of Illinois is to do a mini version of this, kind of a starter version, because they're so far ahead of us, but basically lay out the concept for what this would look like in the state. 2010 was their base year when they did the planning, and these are all the counties from north to south, with the ridership between each county on either an Amtrak bus, an Amtrak train, or a commuter train. And it's interesting because Fresno and San Luis Obispo are both pretty big Amtrak stations by our standards, but in order to make this readable over here, they had to leave those off. It just shows you how much the traffic goes up. With all the projects that are in the pipeline in 2018, the ridership would improve dramatically if they continued on a disconnected agency by agency program. In 2040 though, or what happens if you integrate that, if you do it as one system that's together and phased, and you make sure all the trains are timed, you take a little bit more to do this, a little bit more money, but it results in a 10-fold increase over what was happening in 2010. This is the different segments of high-speed line in different colors. So they're under construction today between San Francisco and San Jose on a regional upgrade of their commuter rail for high-speed rail and shared commuter trains. They are wrapping up the environmental clearance to get over the mountains at both ends. They're under construction here in the middle, and they intend to start construction soon on Bakersfield to Merced, and then these are later segments. And then there's a private company, again, Brightline, the same people from Florida. They intend to build a high-speed line from Las Vegas to Victorville, and then they're doing the design work to get them across the Cajon Pass. And then the LA Metro Planning Agency is doing the design work from Victorville to Palmdale. And that way you could run trains from the Central Valley to Las Vegas, right? Which makes, again, by doing it as a system, you can, by having this piece and this piece, it becomes a lot easier to build this piece. And when you build this piece, it's a lot easier than to build that piece. And so frequency is critical to making this work. 1 or 2 trains a day doesn't do it. You really need to have a lot more. Right now, the Amtrak service that is on this Y here has 7 trains a day, with 2 going this way and 5 going that way. When they open the high-speed line, there will be 18 here, and then 18 trains a day will meet them coming up this way. And then all of these bus lines will see dramatically expanded service as well. So because of that, ridership will go up throughout the entire state. It'll double. The revenue will more than double, and the cost of running the statewide network will actually remain about the same. There's some things we need to do to get moving. One is we've really got to think about Metra, no longer just about getting people from suburbs to downtown for a normal workday, and really think about Metra being for trips throughout the day in all directions, and extending Metra beyond the current 6 counties. Certainly to Rockford, and we believe that Metra is a good choice for going out to Dubuque. We need to get this statewide plan underway, and then there really needs to be a design of a railroad station at O'Hare, and figuring out how to create the connection from your line to O'Hare. There's a cool opportunity right now to, because the president, the Secretary of Transportation, folks all around the country are really talking about high-speed rail. And now's the time to get engaged. I think I missed, is it next after this? I'm out of order. So I want to talk real quick, since you're about Dubuque. Right now the planning is happening in a segmented way. This piece is funded for construction. We want the state to think about starting there with at least 5 trains a day. There's a study underway right now for Rockford to Dubuque. Hopefully they'll think about 2 or 3 trains a day. And then we'd really like Iowa to extend that study out to Waterloo and then tie it into the Metro service with a station in Franklin Park so that you can make a connection to O'Hare. That's something we would really like to happen. And we would like the state to think about a different type of train for this route, which would be based on this train here that goes between Fort Worth and Dallas, which on a lighter volume route where you're not going faster than 80 or 90, it will consume a lot less fuel. It will get into and out of stations faster than the typical Amtrak train, which will mean that you can get over the road out to your part of the world faster, go around the turns a little bit faster, and have less fuel cost, which will make running more frequent service much more viable. So if you want to get involved, our website is highspeedrail.us. There's a petition you can sign there. And I'll put you on our newsletter, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.